Bot lifecycle management is a description of how automations move through the three control rooms of development in an enterprise environment. Those control rooms represent the three stages of development for your automations: development, or dev, testing, or test, and production, or prod. Moving automations from one control room to the next is an administrative function that most developers don't have access to. However, as a bot developer, you need to know how to ensure your automation works properly through all the steps of bot lifecycle management. The methods that we're describing here in this video are examples, and you should always check with your Center of Excellence to find their recommended methods of handling bot lifecycle management. One common way to ensure automations work correctly is to use the credential vault. When your Center of Excellence sets up credentials like usernames and passwords, those values can actually change in each of those three control rooms. This means that in dev, your automation will use dev credentials. When the automation moves to test or prod, it will be using those test or prod credentials. The only thing that must be set up by the administrator is identical credential names in each of the three control rooms. Once those are created, they can set the dev, test, and prod credential values in each of the three control rooms. Another way is to use a configuration file. Typically, XML files are used for configuration. This allows for a file that is mostly human readable and allows for access to any of the values without having to read the entire file line by line. I've uploaded some configuration files to my control room. Having the files uploaded to the control room means that I won't lose them, and that the config files can be marked as a dependency with my automation, meaning it'll be copied when the automation is copied. I can also view and edit the configuration files from here in the control room. Let's take a look at a simple configuration file and see how it's structured. There's nothing particularly complex about this file. It contains a website, a username, and a password. What this file doesn't do is compensate for which environment that it's in. Let's look at the other configuration file I uploaded to this control room and compare and contrast. The way this configuration file is compensating for the environment is by use of this environment tag. It could be named anything, but I've called it environment. When the admins move the automation and config file to another environment, all they have to do is modify this tag. A well-built automation will then use that tag to compensate, along with some additional automation code. The change, though, is really easy. So instead of parsing single values like we did from the regular XML file, we'll actually go and grab that environment variable and make that into something a little bit different. Let's see how to do this. Since the configuration file are in XML, I'm going to go to the XML package here to process them. Let's start off with a start session. And since I've uploaded these files to my control room, I can then browse over to that folder and choose the configuration file I want. I'm going to go to the more complex configuration file and click Choose. And the only things I need to do here is to get a single node, which will have my environment, and save that to a string variable. Now for any of the other values I want to get from this XML file, I'll still use the get single node, but depending on how this is set up, I'm going to change this based on if I'm using attributes or tags inside the XPath. If we look at our XML file again, we'll see that the site tag has three attributes: dev, test, and prod. The username tag has subtags: dev, test, and prod. And password, well, it stays the same for all three environments, so we didn't have to put any distinguishing parts in here. Let's first look at the site. The only thing I need to do to get to those other attributes is to put in my environment string variable into the attribute. Then I can store that value. Very easy. It's not much more complex to get the other values, like from the username. All I have to do is put a trailing slash and then the environment variable at the end. And this will become a custom XPath based on that environment variable's value. And then I can store that as our username. Finally, for the password, since this one doesn't change, I can just put in a hard-coded XPath and save that out. I can now end my session, and that's all I need to do to get dynamic values from my configuration file. Now, both of these methods work the same way and are equally easy to implement, but check with your Center of Excellence to find out which method is what they prefer. Another way of doing this is using the control room name that's stored in the system AA control room variable. And this will return the URL of the control room that you're currently connected to. All you'd have to add is some if/else-if actions into your automation, or you can even look them up from a pre-filled dictionary variable. This method works well unless you change the control room server name. Now, another way of doing this would be to have your administrators set up a global value. And that global value could contain that environment name that you're in. Now, setting that value to dev, test, or prod makes for an easy way to determine the environment the automation is running in, but it doesn't solve the problem of any credential values changing. So what did we learn here? Bot lifecycle management is the process automations take to move from the dev environment to the test environment to the production environment. Automations don't natively know which environment they're in, so we must tell the automation should it need to modify its credentials for the environment that it's currently running in. Using credential vault variables is a good way to change credential values when changing environments, since each environment has its own control room. The credentials can contain different values for the different environments. Using an XML configuration file can contain the environment the automation is running in and contain credentials that change, or even stay the same, for each environment. Using the control room name and the system AA control room variable, it lets your automation know which control room that it's running in. Or a global value set by the admins contains an indicator of which environment that the automation is running in. Hope this makes the developer side of bot lifecycle management a little clearer. Thanks for watching, and go be great.